Well, welcome everyone to today's webinar. So we're going to be talking about how to combat IT sprawl and a couple other topics around that. We'll maybe cover some total cost of ownership and really kind of take a look at all the amazing things that go into understanding kind of your current IT stack and how to reduce that sprawl and start to consolidate all those different pieces that you have. So before we dive into today's topic, a couple other upcoming JumpCloud events. So we're going to be talking a little bit more about password management, IT hour, and always feel free to join us in the Slack lounge. We have some weekly product updates and demos as well, and more webinars coming your way. But back to the topic at hand. And so in order to dive into this, I'll be your host, Chase, and I'm joined today by Danny Gardner. And we're going to be talking a little bit more about how MIQ approach this and kind of some of the thought process and also the evolution over time and kind of what that looked like. So I'll actually pass it over. So Danny, if you could introduce yourself.
Absolutely, nice to be a part of this, Chase. Thank you very much for having me and for having MIQ in general. I know that we've done quite a lot of work with you before. My name's Danny. I lead the IT team in North America as part of a larger systems engineering team globally for a company called MIQ. We're a programmatic media partner working with marketers and agencies across the globe. So we predominantly focus on data, collecting data from multiple sources, doing some really interesting and exciting things for our clients and making sure that they're spending their media investments on the right things and the right places. We kind of sit globally. We've got about 1,000 users covering the majority of our major markets, and we have around 15 offices globally.
Well, that's quite the footprint that you have. I guess give us a little bit of a sense of kind of what your team looks like and kind of what that makeup is involved, especially kind of as you start to support, 15 offices around the globe.
Absolutely. So our team in North America is based on myself. I'm based out of Canada, despite the accent. We kind of look after around 400 users across kind of the US and Canadian markets. We have a team in New York as well. And then globally, we have our engineers sitting within kind of a three-structured team. We have our systems engineering team, we have our security team, and our cloud engineering team. The majority of who are sat within our amazing MIQ hub based out of Bangalore in India.
Okay, and so you mentioned the word hub there, and so are there different kind of approaches that the different teams have kind of amongst the geographies?
Absolutely. So our head office is based out of London, UK. We found that we could kind of build this amazing hub of analysts out of Bangalore in India. So within that structure, we have multiple engineers working on these different approaches in order to kind of get the best skill sets that we can across the different markets. So all of our main IT engineering teams sit in Bangalore, India, and then in London we have an amazing IT engineer, and same goes for New York as well. We have two amazing engineers there. And we kind of do our sort of external support with the main basis coming from our hub in India.
Perfect. Well, thank you for giving us that background and kind of a baseline for how we're going to be approaching today's topic. And so when we're thinking about IT sprawl, it's not usually because a team got a surge in budget and kind of went out and bought everything under the sun and kind of came and do it. Usually it's created over time, right? Kind of several different decisions made, especially too, as different technologies or kind of threats kind of come up and expand. And so from that perspective, I'm wondering if you could give us a sense of where the team, the technology was, say, perhaps like 3 years ago, and how it's evolved into what you're acting and executing on today.
Absolutely. Well, I think with most companies, obviously, in particular with our own, even looking further back than 3 years, we started with our amazing founders, German and Lee, with a laptop each, and here we are kind of over a decade later. We've scaled significantly since then. Over the last 3 years in particular, historically, most of our engineers were managing Active Directory, and our infrastructure was, for the most part, on-prem. As well as different applications, everything was sort of scattered. A lot of our process were manual, and we just found that it's just so time consuming when you're having to kind of do all of those processes. As anyone knows who is in the IT kind of field, managing things and hosting them in offices and on premises, it takes up a lot of engineer hours, managing patches and even things from onboarding and offboarding. So as well as, the physical maintenance of hardware, and it just became really cumbersome for the team trying to work within these different global markets, it just got to the point where it wasn't productive anymore. So I think the pandemic, which I know we've kind of touched on previously in our case study as well, is it really kind of pushed forward that need for change, especially because our digital footprint changed so drastically. By implementing JumpCloud in particular, just kind of looking at that perspective, it's allowed us to really depreciate Active Directory. We've kind of removed all of our localized on-prem solutions, and we're now currently using AWS for the majority of our infrastructure.
Got it. And so it wasn't always just kind of moving away from some of that technology too. The organization was growing during that time as well, right? So you kind of also had to think about the growth of the organization, but then also future-proofing the systems in a sense as well.
Absolutely. And I think we were very lucky to be in a situation during the pandemic where we saw a huge amount of growth, in particular over the last kind of 2-3 years. We've opened new offices. We've really grown our team both in India and globally, which has pushed forward the need to rethink our infrastructure, rethink our organization, both from the everyday user getting a laptop all the way through to how we're managing that and how we're managing it globally as well.
Yeah, and when you're making those changes, when your hand is probably forced a little bit, but then also the growth is pulling you in another direction, and you're thinking about making those changes throughout your stack, right? And kind of we mentioned kind of evolving from 2 laptops in a coffee shop to where we are today. When your team is looking at new technologies that might help you solve certain problems, what is your approach, or how do you approach those pieces, making sure you're getting the value out of them?
Absolutely. I think kind of making sure you're evaluating new technologies is something that's really important. I think for ourselves, it's really hard to put a definitive evaluation on the changes that we've made because honestly, it impacts and it continually changes every day. Especially when we're looking at JumpCloud and we're seeing new releases coming forward. But one of the biggest impacts I think we've seen in the team, just looking at our kind of processes, is for onboarding and offboarding in a remote environment. We're no longer in the offices. We're no longer kind of in the offices full time. So for us, it's allowed our team, by moving away from an on-prem solution, we've seen kind of that new technology. We can see the results of it through our people and our teams having more time to delegate their resources more effectively. We've got fewer manual processes every day. When we're onboarding new hires, we've got almost nominal processes in terms of we're not having multiple touch points. I think in terms of evaluating new technologies as an organization, it's our belief too that we invest in core business services. When it comes to developing our infrastructure in particular, we're really effective at kind of looking towards the buy mode versus the build mode. If a product works really well and it's already in the market and other people are using it, why would we kind of build our own when we can look at this and we can have a really effective solution that's off the shelf as such?
Yeah, I think especially too, kind of off the shelf, and as you take it off the shelf and kind of bring it home in a sense, right, and kind of introduce it in the teams. Are there certain areas that you look for in terms of integrations to other pieces of technology you're leveraging, other pieces like that that you kind of have through your filter as you're looking at these different technologies?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for us, automation is a massive part of that. We integrate with, when JumpCloud was brought on board as an example, it needed to integrate with, BetterCloud as part of our automation processes and making sure that it was really fluid. Is it working with Google Workspace? I think all of those things make it really important to kind of look at a product. Is it going to work for us in the long run? When we're kind of bringing it in now, does it work now, but will it also work when we grow, when we add another 500 users, when we're adding another office, when we're adding more infrastructure in place? So I think for us, kind of evaluating those sorts of things, bringing new technology in, it's really important that it's going to grow with us, and also that the company itself is going to grow. There's no point bringing in a technology where the company is like, great, we've done a job, that's all we're going to do. And I think even when you look at JumpCloud in particular over the last 6 months, 12 months, the improvements that have come out and the things that are kind of looking at being released compared to where you were a year ago. And that's what we look for in a partner when we're bringing a product into play.
Got it. So making sure that, you know, kind of their vision of the future matches yours, and then obviously the growth that comes along with it, and making sure that you're able to scale, right? And so it's not really just a here and now type of decision. It sounds like, you know, a few years out, at least as a minimum, right? And you're trying to reestablish or kind of constantly making sure that you have a strong baseline to operate from.
Absolutely. And I think we're really lucky to be we're very fortunate as a company to be in a position where, you know, our leadership team, our CFO, are fully supportive of the fact that, you know, we really push to kind of bring in those organizations who are going to give time back to us as a team. You know, they're going to come in and they're going to do that job, and they trust us as an IT team to look at new products or reinvigorate the ones we have to make sure that we're getting the best out of it.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned onboarding a couple times, and I think that's one of those super fun processes that's different in every organization, and it's different for every employee coming on, because it really has an impact on how they experience the organization, and two, it kind of sets the tone for how people, you know, expect other things to operate, right? So if I start from day one, how can I know that the rest of my career here or my time will be spent wisely? And some of those processes are automated, making life a little bit easier. So I'd love to just kind of take a sneak peek. Could you give us a sense of what it's like to onboard someone coming into MIQ?
Absolutely. Onboarding is something that I personally am really passionate about. I've been in a situation where you get given a laptop and then it's enjoy your first day, and there's kind of nothing else. And I think one thing that MIQ, not one thing, multiple things, but in particular, onboarding it's so efficient here, and we want to ensure that the end user who is joining the organization, you know, really starts off on the best foot. So for us, it all starts with our HR. You know, it's HR creating the new user, and that triggers all of the automation down to the point where we're then on JumpCloud, having barely any touch points to that point in order to create a new user and create their device. So for us, we use BetterCloud for our workflows. BetterCloud integrates with JumpCloud, which integrates with Google Workspace, and with a click of a button, we can have that user in. We can assign them to a device. We can roll out our policies, and their machine is good to go. So I think that compared to kind of getting a device, manually creating a user on Active Directory, manually creating their email account, manually setting, you know, all of these manual processes that take so much time. And I find that in particular in smaller organizations, people probably get lumbered with that more because it sounds daunting to put these processes and bring in these applications. But actually, in the end, it takes back so much time for the IT team.
Absolutely. And I guess real quickly, as folks kind of continue to come on, if you have any other questions for Danny, feel free to throw them into the chat, and we will start to cycle through those as well, making sure that a little bit more interactive for those that are joining as well. And so coming back to this topic of sprawl and kind of how we think about it, how we approach it, another term that is counter to it, or I'd say a way of measuring how much sprawl an organization might have, is this notion of total cost of ownership. Kind of how do you understand you know, everything that's working together within your IT and security stack to making sure it's working for you, but it's also providing enough value, and there's not, let's say, you know, over-indexing on certain things that you might already have, or kind of have several different applications that might be achieving the same thing. Yeah. I'm curious from your perspective, when you're taking a couple steps back and looking at MIQ's kind of total cost of ownership and kind of what does that look like, how do you approach those types of things?
Well, I think we are, for ourselves, for starters, we have dedicated key results in place for those sorts of things, especially for product and tech costings. As an organization, you know, we've always been really laser focused on total cost of ownership, and even looking back at kind of the last 3-5 years alone, our cost of infrastructure has consistently decreased despite our business revenue increasing and our digital footprint growing, which is always a really good sign that actually you do have kind of control of it, and you're doing the right things and you're putting the right platforms in place. If we kind of jump back to JumpCloud, I know during our case study chats, we kind of did some research on cost savings. And I think even just by utilizing JumpCloud alone in the last year, it's brought in a cost savings of around $8,000 per year per lot on licensing and infrastructure. So for us, it's all about finding the right balance between what we need and what we want to bring in versus our return on investment. And if you're looking at softwares and applications that are going to kind of speed up our IT teams every day, then it's always going to be, a good return on investment.
Absolutely. And so that's great to hear. So that puts you in kind of some rarefied air for that most people, right, where the business is continuing growing, but actually the infrastructure cost, not only is it not linear, but it's also decreasing as well. So I guess lesson learned is keep growing, and then we'll kind of see more decreases come from there. And I know you mentioned kind of the hard dollar cost, which is always great to see, especially kind of removing that. And for the CFOs listening in, that's always great to hear, kind of making sure that we can recoup that and put it back either into the savings of the organization or into other new projects or kind of enhancements that you'd want to get to in the future. And when we're thinking about total cost of ownership, I think that there's kind of two sides. So we have the hard dollar costs, right, of kind of savings that you can show that on a spreadsheet and say, hey, here's what we're going to do from there. But there's also kind of the soft costs that are associated with that. So if you have a lot of different tools and technologies, it takes up time to understand kind of what signals might be sending from others. How do we interpret that and making sure that they're all talking to the same, one, other systems, but then two, people in the process of those systems. And so from your perspective, I know you mentioned automation several times and kind of making sure that you have that. How much of that is within your focus when you're thinking about total cost of ownership, but really more on the soft costs of, does it all work together? Does it help us achieve our goals, and not just from the dollar saved?
It's huge, and I think that is our main focus. I think dollar saves are great, and I'm speaking on behalf of the team, but yeah, dollar saves are great, and that's obviously what people want. But also at the end of the day, it needs to be effective. So whether you're when you're bringing something in, we look at it from, is this going to save us time? Is it going to save the end user time? Is it going to be something that has longevity and that we can build on? And I think all of those encompass total cost of ownership. So yes, it's great that we might save money when we're bringing things in, but also if you're bringing something in and we're saving money, but you're costing the IT team even more hours, it kind of they go against each other. So I think for us, it's really important to make sure that any solutions that we bring into place are really giving back to the people on the ground, which is our IT engineers, our systems engineers, and making sure that we're not, triggering more costs associated with time, which is a big thing. And I know that a lot of companies do kind of struggle with that, and making sure that the product that we're getting in, regardless of cost savings initially, is actually going to save us money in the long run because it's working for everyone as it should.
Yeah. And so I guess there's kind of that evaluation of hard costs, soft costs, everything else in between. But usually that is when you're, I'd say, given some more options, given some more flexibility. And so what are the things that MIQ relies on regardless of costs, right? We know that we need this in order to kind of have this type of approach when we want to make sure that the organization is secure, when we want to make sure that we're productive. So what are those baseline needs that you say, look, regardless of what that is, we know that we need to continue to operate like this in order to ensure kind of where MIQ is heading in the future?
I think for ourselves, it is a product that, again, kind of repeating that, making sure that it's growing and scaling is like a big thing for us. And in terms of products that we're getting in soft costs and things like that, I think it has to enable us to really focus on the end goal of what is at the end of this year, what's at the end of next year, and where do we see ourselves. And we're very good at kind of putting those indexes in place as to where we want to be. And I think it's ensuring that whatever we're bringing in is going to align with that, regardless of cost.
Yeah, and I think a lot of pieces of around that too is what's happening out there in the world. How can we continue to adjust, and making sure that when we're thinking about the tools and the technologies that allow us to secure our organizations a little bit more. Usually those are some of the elements that you start to think about of, okay, we need some baseline, but then also how do we think about operating? How do we make sure that people are productive? How do we make sure that all of that is achieved regardless of what the tooling, kind of the considerations that we might have? Another, it's a framework too that I wanted to get your thoughts on kind of as we discover. I think we have a slide for this. Give me a moment, we can spin this up. But when you do need to make changes, when there's other things, there's kind of a 4-step process that we'll look through of reducing, removing, kind of reallocating, and consolidating some of those technologies. And let me real quickly pull this up. There we go. And so these are some of the levers that we will think about when we're looking to reduce that IT sprawl or kind of reduce that total cost of ownership. And when there's one element of that is like, hey, we'll just reduce it, right? We'll kind of look at what's not needed, we'll remove it, we'll reallocate it. And then in some instances too, we start to consolidate that. And you might see this a little bit more into looking at a platform type of approach. I'd love to get your sense on kind of how MIQ has kind of walked through, or kind of maybe some examples, if you have them, of where you've implemented some of these levers when you're thinking about your total cost of ownership and reeling those sprawling actors in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think looking at even our workflows and bringing into processes like that is, we've kind of gone from, okay, we've got all these different systems, we're using Active Directory, we're creating users, we've got all the actual physical hardware, how can we, I think, bringing that into one place, focusing heavily on the cloud and kind of taking away the need for this like physical hardware in an office, this maintenance. I think for us, it's kind of reducing the need for man hours being spent there and reallocating that into actually developing the cloud infrastructure and security and infrastructure as well.
Absolutely. And so I think think about removing Active Directory, kind of getting that out, but it's also making sure that all of those processes are, held up, right? Just because, the domain controllers move doesn't mean that people are stopped onboarding or they continue to need access to everything they have. Another piece that we will typically see too is kind of in the reallocation area, where say, hey, is there a piece or an application that can serve our purposes elsewhere? So, for example, within JumpCloud, we leverage Atlassian kind of across multiple different departments in different areas, and leverage Jira for a bunch of different areas, because we know that we are able to kind of reallocate elements of that software across different teams, kind of wherever they're touching, just kind of as one example. And when you're, kind of thinking about that and kind of reallocating technologies, that kind of feeds back into kind of steps 1 and 2, right? Where you're thinking about how we can reduce, how we can remove, and really kind of get to a core set that continues and allows us to automate, but also we are, let's say, slimming down kind of the threat surface a little bit more, making sure that we're only involved in a few kind of core different technologies. And then that finally allows you to kind of operate and kind of come into how you can consolidate all of those different pieces and ensure that they're all talking to each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we use Okta for a great deal of that in terms of single sign-on, having those kind of pieces integrated and talking to each other. It's kind of consolidating the need to have all these external resources. We have one place, we have one touch point again, and it is kind of reducing that need for adding into different systems. It's all connected. It's all connected via BetterCloud and JumpCloud, and we're kind of really stopping multiple different systems and logins here and logins there. It's just one application that we're using.
Yeah, bring it all under one roof, kind of get a good sense of what everyone's up to as well, right? And so from an understanding of how people are getting in and out of systems, or kind of where they're authenticating into, it helps kind of speed all those different pieces, so you're not hopping around trying, especially, as we all know, real time, trying to figure out who's up to what, it becomes a lot harder when you're logging into multiple different systems. So bringing it down into kind of one pane of glass, one platform, kind of one lever that you can have within your organization.
Exactly, yeah, definitely. And I think with us in particular, we try and ensure as much automation as possible in terms of, when we're implementing any changes and any kind of making sure that everything is nominal, the impact is nominal for our end user. I always personally say that, I feel like, a change has been done well in an IT situation when no one knows about it. And if your end users aren't finding out about it, it means you're doing a good job. It means there were no issues, which is what we want. And I think we're really lucky to be in a position where we're at the point where all of our integrations are working fluidly. All of our automations and our workflows are working as they should, and kind of we're not relying on the end user for anything. We can press a button and it kind of pulls the trigger.
I think that's an amazing litmus test that I think we all love to have, right? Is implement changes and say, hey, there's been improvements, and I'm not sure why, but right, things have gotten better, and there's no onslaught of Slacks or other,
exactly.
to figure out what's going on in the world.
There's no panic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So bringing all those elements together and not having, let's say a flood, Angela, a flood of feedback coming your way, making sure that you can operate and kind of bring all those pieces back into one.
Absolutely.
One other question I have is, so we have several IT practitioners in the audience today and listening in, and when you're thinking about kind of all the different areas or kind of what's available out in the market, what would be your recommendations to them? So as we're thinking about understanding the total cost of ownership, combating sprawl, kind of bringing that all in a little bit closer, there's always kind of some optimism, right? And so maybe, hey, we got an increase in budget this year, or there might be some other pieces. What are some of the, I'd say, maybe recommendations or other pieces of technology that they say, hey, look, regardless of where you are in an organization or how big your organization is, here's 1, 2, as many as you'd like, kind of other pieces to think about or recommendations that you've seen evolve over your tenure at MIQ?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a multifaceted kind of view, really. The first one I would definitely say is people. It's invest in your people, invest in the teams that you have, however big and small, and I think however big your budgets are as well. That's one thing that MIQ are really good at is we focus on our teams. We're consistently investing in them and their ongoing development, and innovation is key as well. So we're doing events where we're pulling in our brightest minds across the globe to take part in events, in order to kind of put together solutions that we can help our clients develop, their end goals better with. So I think it's really investing in people, making sure that your teams have the tools that they need, they have the training that they need. But on the other side as well, for us in particular, over the last 6 months, we've been really kind of heavily focusing on sort of asset management, security tools. I think, again, don't want to keep going on about the pandemic, but I do feel like there was this huge kind of shift in the kind of paradigm of working in an office 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. I can't foresee that's ever going to go back to that sort of life anymore. So then it's thinking about, what can we do as an IT team working remotely to effectively manage the assets that we have. So we've really kind of focused on bringing in asset management tools, moving away from spreadsheets and kind of condensing everything into one location, which can be costly if you're using a specific tool for it. There are other budget-friendly options, but I think asset management, knowing what you have, knowing where it is, keeping on track of device life cycles as well. So many people you speak to, I speak to friends and they're using, an 8-year-old MacBook that's just been given to them down. And I think it's really making sure that your end users have got the tools they need. And then with that, again, comes security. Once you have this asset management tool in place, you can really focus on security, making sure not only is the end user's device secure with, antivirus, it's making sure that your client's data is secure, that your internal data is secure. And I think that's been a real big push, especially during COVID, where people are working from a hotel in Barbados on public Wi-Fi, and people are working from their hotel room somewhere else, and everyone's working everywhere and they're scattered. So it's ensuring that the products that you're putting in place work really well, they integrate really well. There are definitely a huge range of budgets for enterprise down to small, medium business. And I think it's really making sure that as a team, you have the security tools you need to cover yourselves as a company, but also ensure that your end users know that their data is secure and that nothing's going to happen if they do connect to Starbucks Wi-Fi.
Yes, and even though we will living vicariously through them in their Barbados hotels, but it is
Exactly.
For sure.
Yeah.
So transition, we actually have a couple questions coming in through the audience, and so if there's more, feel free to throw those in. But just on that topic, so with the changing landscape, kind of the first question is, how does MIQ protect their devices, especially when you're thinking about something like a 0-day where action needs to be taken? Kind of how do you approach that?
Yeah, absolutely. So with all of our devices, obviously everything is device managed by JumpCloud very effectively. And we also use Sentinel-1 from our security point of view. And those things together enable us, we can, if a laptop gets dropped on the subway, it's locked, it's wiped. We have full capability and control of our devices, that if at any point we need to, we can lock, we can push out, we can do all of those things. And I think from an antivirus and kind of security process like that, we have multiple workflows in place and policies in place where we will get triggered if certain sites are viewed, or if things are being downloaded, or if there's things lingering in the background that maybe the end user doesn't know about.
Yeah, perfect. Because it is, more often than not, that's kind of the only perimeter we have now is kind of the devices that we have in front of us, making sure that they're secure. So
Yep.
Wherever a hotel or kind of wherever we can be, we can operate effectively.
Absolutely.
So the next question we have is interesting, a little bit broader. And so when we're thinking about kind of addressing IT sprawl, have you found that helps kind of combat shadow IT in some sense, right? Where there's less kind of other things happening within the organization that you don't know about, or are there still some pockets kind of regardless how you start to bring that in? I'm curious about your experience there.
You mean in regards to sort of other things that we have to still continue to do as an IT team?
Or just kind of when you are thinking about consolidating different technologies, does that also help address kind of this other outside portion of shadow IT where people are trying to get in and probably have spin up personal accounts to do work that they need on business or other pieces, or does that maybe just free you up to have a better sense of what's happening within the organization?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's something that I know as an IT team we kind of frequently discuss, which is in particular when you look at project management tools, for example, people creating accounts, and then you have all of those situations where you've got multiple accounts on different solutions. I think it definitely is, I think, an ongoing issue probably for most organizations. But I think having JumpCloud in place and having the automation as a team to be able to kind of go in and look at new products and see what might work for a team, we should hopefully reduce that in the future.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, and I guess one other question coming in as how do you address whether it might be users, people that are looking to provision new types of technology applications and say, hey, I want this very specific name brand, right? Or kind of I heard of this one vendor, can we implement it? How do you have the conversation, or kind of how does that happen within your organization of saying, look, I hear you, and we already have X, right? Or we're leaning on this technology that covers multiple different use cases, as we mentioned, kind of within the reallocation scenario, right? What does that type of conversation look like, or how do you approach that?
A very good point, and I think it's definitely a conversation that we've been having very recently as a team. I think it's a difficult one because if you've got kind of one team using one product, they really love it, chances are on a different market there's a very similar tool. For us, we want unification, and we want to make sure that our teams are kind of getting the best product. So I think it's listening. It's listening to the products that they are using and that they're kind of recommending, seeing if that's something that would fit within our infrastructure, and obviously looking at the actual costs of it, the total cost of it, really. Is it something that we can really implement, is there going to be user charges every month and those kind of sneaky, actually it's $30 a user kind of charge. I think it's something that we are, as an organization, we always take recommendations. At the end of the day, it does tend to come down to, we've got some really good kind of processes in place for large scale changes. And I think in particular for ourselves, we have our leadership team, before any impactful changes are made, we kind of look through everything, and we have a really good framework in place to help us evaluate those new tools and look at whether there's something actually we already have. We have Jira, it's a good project management tool. Looking at the things we have, seeing what's cost effective, and then if there is a new product on the market that might work better, really fully evaluating it, looking at the cost in 2, 3, 4 years time, and seeing if it's still going to be an effective product for us.
That's perfect. Yeah, I think it's always an interesting conversation. Like you said, we'll always take recommendations and kind of receive feedback, but when the decision's been made, kind of bringing it back into the fold of, hey, what is the total cost, right? What does this look like? Have you looked at all these other things? Because it might be a knee-jerk reaction, or help kind of educate all the end users on what their options are, really, because I think that's another big piece of it. Well, that's all the questions that we had come through, and so I want to thank you so much for kind of walking through how MIQ has approached this, all the different levers that we have at our disposal. One other piece I wanted to share real quickly is we do have some additional resources, the case study that Danny mentioned, and then also a couple actual tools that you can leverage in terms of understanding your own total cost of ownership. What does that look like, and a way to start calculating that for your organization as you start to think about all of those different pieces. And so with that, I want to thank everyone for joining us today, especially Danny. Thank you so much for giving us better insight into how MIQ has grown, operated, approaches all of these different things when we are thinking about how to combat IT sprawl.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having us. We love working with JumpCloud. So if there's anyone listening on the call who hasn't yet made the jump, dad joke there, I would definitely recommend looking into it.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, and everyone have a fantastic rest of your day.
Please subscribe and check out more content from us.